Good morning. Good morning. I'm Ross. I am chair of the Writers Witness Program, Writing Studies Program. And so today we are going to present our Writers Witness book that we have students read, first year students read over the summer. And the one that was chosen for this year is Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. And so we'll be presenting some information naturally about the book. And there are also some strategies that we're going to be using in the classroom. I already told Adam Tomaszewski, who had just presented, and he has to run to another presentation, that I'm stealing some of his ideas. But we're also going to hear about the Writers Witness Program from our program director, Kelly Joyner.
Thank you. I didn't have to hear a microphone. No. Welcome. So the Writers Witness Program is in its 28th year. Mentions of 28, sorry. I've been here for full fun, so some books created me. It's a long program. I put the selection of books that we've had in the last decade or so. Great books, prominent authors with excellent ideas. We've got lots from it. It feels like this book is sort of a change your pace from for us. The last dozen or so have been sort of about social justice issues and about sort of meaty and thorny social issues. This one is about sort of pop culture from long time, talking about cults. I mean, there's also very serious elements to cults, and there are big ones. But Amanda Montell's take was sort of as a social and social print and cultural trade point. So this is the book. One of the qualities of your Writers Witness text. Why do we choose it, and what are our requirements? It has to be a nonfiction book. The author has to be available to visit campus, which also means that we have to be able to afford there has to be some element of witness, and that's pretty one. By that we mean that the author should have some sort of personal investment in the topic. And it's some books are memoirs, just flat memoirs. A lot of books are not memoirs; they are reportage, and the author sort of is a deep dive into something. But there has to be some element of witness. I would say this is not a deal breaker, but it's just awesome if the book has transparent research, so then we can take it into our classrooms and ask our students. So Montell makes this assertion on page such and such. How does she back that up? Go to her notes at the end of the book. Go to her website and tell us how she's backing it, how she's backing this up, because that's incredibly valuable for a learning class. So why this book and why Cultish? She has a family connection. Her father was, when he was 14 years old, because of his family connection, because his parents got sucked into a cult. He made his way out of it. It's 8 years later. But he made his way, he got into a cult, he made his way out of it, and he had a lot to say about it. And that's part of the reason that Montell is fascinating, because she has a podcast about cults. And if you listen to it, it is very much a sort of a pop culture critique of cults. It's very light, even though that's even sort of cults they get into are very serious. There's an episode about the cult of incels that is pretty serious. But it's also Cultish comes from become someone's cycle. So it's pop culture commentary. Her writing style is very approachable and engaging, not scholarly, but it is a very approachable book. So all of these things, I think, maybe attract folks about. I'm thinking a lot about the aversion that we hear that the people have toward reading books. Maybe not the NU students, but I think probably the slaves. This is an attractive book because it's easily readable, and I think students are sort of automatically interested in this topic. It's just sort of an zeitgeist. So it makes it sort of an attractive book in that sort of, and I think it is better than I wouldn't say short book and so. Okay. So that's the book. Now I'm going to pass it on to Ken. Okay. So just yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to provide an overview, the contextual context on Cultish, and just talk about some significant themes. And then I'm going to talk about some of the appropriations or misappropriations of language that she targets in the book. So Amanda Montell is a linguist. She does have an iHeart award-winning podcast called Sounds Like a Cult. She wrote for the New York Times. She is a bestseller, which was The Age of Magical Overthinking, and her works have been published in a number of newspapers and magazines, The Guardian, Esquire, and Harper's Bazaar. And her iHeart Radio Award, she won that in 2022 for the Best Emerging Podcast. So her argument is that cults and cultish, because she really explores this definition of what a cult is. That we have our own, preconceived notions of what a cult is. But as Kelly says, she's not just looking at, like the Branch Davidians. She's also looking at like Costco. She's looking at Orange Theory and that sort of thing. Peloton, which was, horrific for me I'm kidding. So anyway, she's going beyond what we would, assume is a cult. So she talks about these groups and these communities from Jonestown to Scientologists to pyramid schemes. Like she talks about Mary Kay. She talks about Amway as well, social media gurus. And she talks about specifically language itself being this preeminent source of power. I don't know that we would necessarily Sarah would say, ooh, that's revelation. But the way she lays it out for you and just her engaging conversational tone just kind of makes you go, huh? Wow. Like I didn't think about that. I was just thinking brainwashing, but she really levels this down and takes it to a granular level. It's language. And she says that you can look at notorious cults, again, Heaven's Gate, Branch Davidians, or these commonplace, innocuous communities that we have, even like our houses of worship. And I know I belong to a walking, hiking group. And, we have merch and all of that. And I'm thinking, I'm a cult. I'm a fucking cult. I didn't think about it. So significant things that she discusses in the book are that we are cultish by nature. Don't eat this. Because we need to feel naturally a part of a community. We need to feel significant. We need to feel purposeful, that we're making contributions, really tapping into that Maslow's hierarchy. And because I'm a Montessorian, I'm going to rep her wherever I go. She calls it the fundamental needs of humans. And through all of these things, we form an identity, right? We sustain our identities. She talks about co-leaders using a variety of techniques to create these communities and to maintain control. So language itself, like when we talk about rhetoric in our classes, we know that rhetoric creates realities for listeners, right? She says that cultish behavior can be seen in daily life, in ideological communities. Like, I've been listening just a lot to Joe Rogan. I'm really not a follower. I just like to tap in to see the things that he talks about. But yeah, ideological communities, religious communities, fitness organizations, and businesses. And at the end, though, she kind of leaves us with these decisions that we can make, that we can do the things that we do with students, right? We teach them to interrogate, right? Words, language. We teach them to engage in things like source evaluation, lateral reading. Who is this source affiliated with? What have they written for in terms of publications? We teach them to check for fallacies. And we're teaching them rhetorical listening. And I'll get back to this at the end. Okay. So some of the language techniques that Montell lays out, there are 4. Actually, there are more, but I just looked at 4 because I didn't know the terminology for these things. So I was talking to one of my nieces, and 2 of my nieces are therapists. They're sisters. Both of them are therapists. And she was like, "Oh, I hate love bombing." And I was like, "You know what? I didn't know what that was. I know the behavior, but I didn't know there was a term for it." So she says it's using language as a tool of identification, appealing to ethos through this customized attention in order to validate the follower's existence. What's the aim of eventually controlling them? So she used an example of Leslie Wagner Wilson. Leslie Wagner Wilson grew up in Jim Jones's People's Temple cult. And when they were in Guyana, the day of the mass murder suicide, she was the only person in her family who survived. She had a baby. She took like a sheep and wrapped her baby, on her back and fled through the rainforest. And that was the way she survived. But she said what was so powerful about Jim Jones was the fact that he could talk to anybody on any level. It did not matter who they were. He was well-read. He listened to speeches, everybody from MLK to Hitler, and he studied these people's techniques. But it was this love bombing that he was able just to appeal to anyone at any time, she says. And she continues by saying that he could tap into anyone's, interests. She was a young person at a time in which people were really questioning, what did the civil rights movement do for us? What did Black Power do for us? Are we seeing significant changes? So in these psychological liminal spaces, it seems that that's where cults or cultish organizations or people can thrive. So we knew that she loved Angela Davis. That was her idol. So he appealed to her by calling her my little Angela Davis. And might I say that, he also insisted that people refer to him as father. And that seems to be, this paternal, entity that seems to be kind of commonplace in reading this book that cults do. She talks about, secondly, recreated language, in versus out vocabulary. So for the followers, it sets up this superiority value system. So according to another Jonestown survivor, Laura Johnston Cole, she said that Father Divine said to always establish a we and they. There always has to be an enemy, right? And the thing about it is, but with recreated language, you can escape that, right? You're better than they are. You have this insight to this esoteric symbolic system by which you can survive if you only stick with me. So in the Heaven's Gate cult, members were assigned a suffix to the ends of their names, Adi, Odi. And so there was Thurstanadi, Sylviadi, Elenadi, etc. So recreating these identities and these realities for the members. She also talks about loaded language, which of course reminded me of Orwell in both 1984 and Politics of the English and the English Language. So she talks about the fact that, and he does, Orwell, that using misleading euphemisms that are vague is a way to control your members. So Albertson in Heaven's Gate would use terms such as exiting your vehicle or overcoming containers to inherit next level bodies. So in other words, we know what that really is, right? We know that that's suicide, in which of course they did wearing purple capes and sneakers and having the same haircut. And the last one is thought terminating cliches. This one really got to me because I was like, oh, that's what you call it. I, again, didn't know. So shutting down the discussion by silencing the possibility of any form of critical thinking. So she talks about Amway, and multi-level marketing rhetoric is that every willing and hardworking person can be successful in this business. A good system always works. So in other words, if you are not successful, it's not their fault. It's not the economy's fault. It's your fault. End of story. End of story. And let me say this. At one point, I did do a short stint with Mary Kay, and I was like in the second day, bye. I cannot hit you. Anyway, so I kind of looked at perhaps a rhetorical progression. This is not necessarily in this order, but I just thought it would kind of flow and be logical. So you start with love bombing, right? To draw them in. Let me appeal to your, to your interests. You're so special. Oh my goodness. Next, recreated language once you're in. Okay, so we live by a different symbolic verbal system, right? Nobody else knows this because you're so special and they are the enemy or they are inferior in terms of intellect. You are on the winning side, right? Then we have loaded language, containers, exiting our containers, right? And then we had thought terminating cliches. We don't abide any type of questioning or critical thinking. We will shut that down. So I was talking, kind of texting last night to Jermaine here, and I was like, you know what? On some level, I think we know this, but I don't know that students know this. I'm going to go back to this whole issue of source evaluation and all of these different things that students are looking at media and they're being hammered away with fallacious language or truth mixed into fallacious language, which is still fallacious language, actually. And this is a source of resistance or a strategy of resistance for students. And so I want to teach students this semester that this really is a resistance for you. And the things that you look at, even the things that you like to listen to and look at. So that is my part. And now I'm going to move on to Adam Tomaszewski, who just was here. And so he talks about a number of lessons that you can use in the classroom for this book. So he starts by saying you can use the book's introduction to set up the importance of asking questions about topics. And he says that Montell early on points out that if we want to move past simplistic answers, we need to start by asking questions, right? So he's saying that he's thinking about using this passage to ask students to ask complicated questions about other topics. And the quote they used was, our culture tends to provide pretty flimsy answers, questions of cult influence, mostly having to do with the vague talk of brainwashing. Why did all those people die in Jonestown? They drank the Kool-Aid. That's what we say, right? They drank the Kool-Aid. Why don't abused polygamous sister wives get the hell out of Dodge as soon as they can? They're mind control. Simple as that. But it's actually not that simple. In fact, brainwashing is a contested term that some of the psychologists interviewed avoid altogether. Truer answers to the questions of the cult influence can only arrive when you ask the right questions. What techniques do charismatic leaders use to exploit people's fundamental needs for community and meaning? How do they cultivate that kind of power? Second point or exercise, you can look at the importance of wrestling with stipulating meanings of key terms and the difficulty of fraught language. Montell wrestles with the word cult. And that's a long passage. So he says, similar to showing students how the right questions can unlock fascinating avenues, this long passage can help students see the complexity waiting behind the fundamental need to stipulate definitions, to wrestle with meanings of sometimes seemingly conventional words. Pick a word or phrase from your discipline/course and ask students to come to a definition, perhaps on their own, perhaps in a group, and or perhaps with existent definitions. He says 3, another activity, meta moments. Help students learn that engaging with the text means asking themselves a question. It exists. Ask students to think about what cults they belong to or what others might say they belong to. So the quote is, ultimately, the needs of need for identity, purpose, and belonging have existed for a very long time. And cultist groups have always sprung up during cultural limbos when these needs have gone sorely unmet. What's new is that in this internet ruled age, a guru can be godless when the barrier to entry is as low as a double tap. And when folks who hold alternative beliefs are able to find one another more easily than ever, it only makes sense that secular cults, from obsessed, workout studios to startups that put the cult in company culture, would start sprouting like dandelions. For good or for ill, there is now a cult for everyone. That's scary. Ask students to think about when language worked as a password, a disguise to get a group's acceptance. And on page 42, Montell describes how she began attending, then using the language of a friend's evangelical mega church. It was like the code language of an exclusive clubhouse. These special terms didn't communicate anything that couldn't be said in plain language English. Using them in the right way at the right time was like a key unlocking the group's acceptance. Immediately, I was perceived as an insider. The language was a password, a disguise, a truth serum. It was so powerful. And I think this is the last one, an excellent model for reading, summarizing, and conducting scholarly research to another topic. And he says that show students how Montell reveals some essential bibliographical details of the study, summarizes well-chosen quotations, then connects the study's conclusion to another topic. And I can't see other than soul cycle instructors. I don't know what's after that. No, I've been guessing so far, delineating the study's importance, but show us applicability to an already discussed subject. And so he said, I read a 2020 study from the European Journal of Social Psychology revealing that folks who received spiritual training in certain supernatural crafts like energy healing and light work were more prone to narcissistic tendencies, limited confidence in their abilities, increased hunger for success and social approval, denigration of anyone lacking their self-elevated evaluated superpowers, etc. This was compared to people who hadn't gone through any spiritual training at all, as well as students studying less performative disciplines like meditation and mindfulness. The study showed that even as these gurus encouraged compassion and self-acceptance in others, their own egos swelled. Master soul cycle instructors seem to display a similar response. Existing pride in their natural charisma combined with the company's extreme training is the recipe for a God complex to that of a 3HO Swami than an ordinary mortal employed to teach stationary cycling. So there you have it. And again, I'm stealing from Adam Thomas Shasky because it said I could, so I guess it's not stealing. But anyway, next. What'd you say?
Yes, I
I know citing the cat. I did. I didn't even think about it. I did. In parentheses. So that, anyway, next up is, sorry. I didn't realize. I forgot.
This is more Adam.
This is more Adam. Last one. Use the conclusion to discuss importance of acknowledging the baggage you're bringing into a research project and remaining open to learning from it. And so she says, Montell says, when I began writing this book, I was a touch concerned that by the end, something about research would just turn, it's what?
All the research.
Okay, all the research would just turn me into an antisocial, misanthropic version of myself. And even though I do feel more hyper-aware than ever of the varying dialects of cultish that imbue our daily lives, I also gained a stronger sense of compassion. While I'm partly likelier likelier to move to a Shambhala-esque co-op or put my loyalty into some Instagram conspiratorialist in myself, I have acquired a newfound ability to suspend harsh judgment of those who might. This comes from knowing that one's out-of-box beliefs, experiences, and allegiances are less a mark of individual foolishness and more a reflection of the fact that human beings are, to their advantage and their detriment, physiologically built to be more mystical and communal than I knew. Wow. So that's what we really want students to do, right? Is to be aware, to be wise, and to be compassionate at the end of the day. All right. So now I'm turning it over to my colleague, Jeremy. I know. It should be over.
Good morning, everyone. One more time. Good morning. Welcome to check. All right. So, I want to talk to you all in regard to this about the dangers of language and how, which you guys probably more so already are aware of, but just how language is weaponized. Before I begin, is there anyone in here who in college you pledged the sorority fraternity? Okay. One person? One. So my sister did too, right? My brothers, we didn't have the personality for it. My older brother, he went on to play in the NFL for like 4 or 5 years. We all were college athletes. And the point I'm making is you understand as a sorority member how identity is affixed to that feeling, right? I know any athletes. Okay. So as an athlete, middle school, I loved it. High school, I loved it. When I got to college, I hated it because I was owned by the universe. I had no life. No life. And they'll tell me, you're dating, break it off. If you are XYZ, you can't work, they literally own you. So the point I'm making is,
the only thing I could pull from that experience was, A, my education was paid for, but B, I felt a part of an extended family. And my identity was fixed to that. So Cultish, language as a tool of manipulation, right? So language is a potent tool which can be utilized to do the following, right? Language can be utilized to psychologically influence or clandestinely influence behavior. And we're seeing a lot of this take place now, right? It can be used to intimidate. And there's this term, maybe I coined it, but the term is oppression language, right? Used by a dominant racial, right? Or any dominant soul cycle, any dominant group. It can be used to persuade, right? Language can shape perceptions and rewrite truths. Language can be used to leverage, right? We can present language to favor a particular viewpoint. And here's where it gets dangerous, right? It can get harmful when we talk about manipulation. Language can be used to manipulate and also redefine terms. Language can be used to redefine a person's characteristics. It can be used to redefine a person's affiliation, right? For example, cults and extremist groups redefine customary words to fit their ideology. Now we're dealing with the psyche, right? And here's the other element of dangerous language. It's the psychological part. I'll get into that in a second. So when you tap into the psyche, it makes it easier to isolate followers. And this is exactly what Amanda is pretty much talking about in this book and text. So I say implicit bias, Hollywood, and media aid in the successfulness of dangerous language. Implicit bias. What does that mean, you guys?
It's what we already believe or what's baked into the understanding of the world.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so it's bias that we're not even aware of them.
Yes, absolutely. It's bias that's been instilled in us primarily from conception. What we've been taught to believe about exterior races and in the world beyond how it should up in the environment. And we go through lighting and we continuously believe these things, and we never decide, some folks never decide to be a grown-up and challenge those biases. So it makes it easy for Aristotle's coin terms, ethos, logos, and pathos, to be used to make folks do some other things they thought they would never do. Ethos is when we influence folks by way, you guys remember that ethos? By way, it's been a long time. So it's not good. Nope. So ethos is when we influence by way of credibility, right? So this is what I give my students this example. Hey, you go get a flu shot at CVS, and the person that's going to administer the shot comes from behind the counter, and they have like a Chick-fil-A uniform. You haven't. We allowed it. No. Okay, so when they put the white coat, they put the white coat. So the white coat is the credibility, right? It makes you forget about the Chick-fil-A uniform. We've been conditioned to believe that the white coat is it's affixed to quality, credibility, and all those good things. Logos who had me influence folks by way of logic and statistics. Another example I give my students, I may say, hey, who eats in McDonald's in here? Everyone raises their hand. I'll say, hey, stop eating at McDonald's today. So it's unhealthy. And looking to like, whatever, McDonald's, I'm going to McDonald's when I leave your class, right? But I used to, it may still be available. I used to show students a cheeseburger that someone purchased in 1999. And for some reason, kept it all the way up to like 2014. I don't know why. And that image may be on the internet. Anyway, the cheeseburger looked, it wasn't too bad. It just had a little fuzz on it. Right, but to be almost 20-something years old, my point is something's in the food to make it cohesive, right? After all these years, when I show that image, students like, oh, yeah, you may be on to something. I may slow down a little bit, that type of thing. And pathos is when we influence by way of tapping into someone's emotions. One example is I tell students, if you've ever been in a relationship where you know was unhealthy and you were able to escape, in some way, somehow you find yourself back into that bad relationship, like how does that even happen to a sane person, right? However, we all are susceptible to these forms of persuasion. And I want to talk about implicit bias quickly and go back and also media, because one thing the book does, it talks about how in terms of being in a cult, how effective the negative image is, right? And Hollywood, you go back, beginning of film, there was a point in time where Asians weren't allowed in Hollywood. So they would cast folks like Marlon Brando and all these folks, paint their skin and actually place Scotch tape over their eyes and give them this ridiculous accent. And there's a perception built from more Asian Americans by the masses in America. When you have a taller white male, now we're getting to white patriarchal power, which this book is about as well. We have the smaller hacker who resembles an Asian, and then we have this whole power structure, and that's how John Wayne was a big, right? Because he's the mascot for America. So psychologically, clandestinely, we can influence behavior by way of words. We can persuade, we can shape perceptions, we can rewrite truths about communities, about individuals. We can intimidate. Oppression language is used by the dominant racial group. We can leverage people by presenting language to favor a particular viewpoint. And this is one of the things I enjoy. And Sarah is my class librarian, does a great job every semester. I go through the craft evaluation and I talk about bias language and research and how to stay away from it and scan your sources so that we can make sure no one has a political motivation and all these great things, right? Manipulation, redefining terms. This is an example. I know you guys can't see this, but this is an example of language manipulation. I'll give you some context. We all remember Hurricane Katrina. It was devastating, right? I remember it like yesterday. I'm somewhat still traumatized. I was a reading specialist at the time. I'm super young, maybe young. And I remember an influx of these students and families coming up to, I was in North Carolina at the time, from that time. Long story short, we just talked about language and perception and how language can be used to what it means as a weapon. And we think about Hollywood, and we think about the media, we think about how folks of color and minorities as well, from our LGBTQI family, all minority groups have been demonized by way of Hollywood. So, and then we have to factor in implicit bias. But my point is this: this is an article that was published. Now, what you don't get from this article is that these two groups of folks, these groups of folks are the same one. Like they're literally 15 feet away from one another, right? There's two pictures taken. So when we read this, and this was published by Associated Press, it was published by Yahoo News and a plethora of news outlets. So the image here, it says a young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting, right? And I know as a writer, even coming from undergrad, we were warned about verbiage when we run, right? A young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store in New Orleans on Tuesday, right? Floodwaters continue to rise in New Orleans, so forth and so on. Here, two residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soap. Now, when you based upon, we all have implicit bias. So the thing is, a lot of us haven't worked to get beyond and move beyond, right? But when you read this, whatever preconceptions you have of Black young men or Black men, it's inflamed just from this word, this usage. And you begin to see and you begin to play on everything have learned, you've been taught from film or literature that weaponizes a community. And you begin to champion the dominant voice or race. And again, I have to go back to this. That's why John Wayne was a big hit, because he was the mascot. He was the very fabric of the American flag, and the language that was used around his movies was it made him intrepid, right? And he can, and even with the revolver he used to kill all these folks, he was seen as, because of Hollywood, he was still sold as this hero, right? All right, so some tips for college students. And these are some things I would advise my students. So we know college is a time of intellectual exploration and social engagement. It's a time where new groups and the use of manipulative language may appear. When we come to college, there are a lot of things that aren't there, right? And this is the political town. This is Washington, D.C. So, and then you look at the area where we are. I rode around last year. I jogged around on one evening, and I just stopped in front of a house, and I pulled up. It was up for sale, and it was like 10.5 million, and literally on the other side of the wall, like the world, man. So my point is, there's a lot going on around you. So one, students can identify manipulative language, gaslighting, and deficit-focused language, right? Deficit-focused language. And that's language that's used to automatically, because of implicit bias, to deride a particular person or group, right? Also, students can develop critical thinking skills, think outside the box, challenge theirs and others' assumptions, be aware of rhetorical signs of isolation. That's how Jones was able to get all those folks and a lot of cults. And no offense to anybody, but I'm going to say this. Even some of these mega churches, some of these pastors, these are, and I say this, and I'm going to, this may be personal, I'm going to share this with you guys. You don't mind if I share something personal. I'm going to do it anyway. So my family's Muslim and Christian, right? And my family in the South, in North Carolina, some of my family, they got deeply rooted in the church. You can never say anything bad about them pastor ever in life. You can steal their car and it'd be cool, but you say something about the pastor, you got a problem. And I always question, like, how does that happen? Like, that's Black church. It is. That's like, well, I know how it happens, but I still say, hey, what in the world? So I'm gonna come back to that point. Seek and respect diversity. They can do that. Respect diversity, and that's why I'm a fan of diversity. It's not even getting away from anything political. It's just being a good, downright good, God-fearing human being of any space. Consider alternative viewpoints and actively research. Kim spoke on research earlier. And here's some potential writing assignments. This is my last slide, guys. And back to the point I was making about my families, where the same thing that Amanda talks about in this book, it's happened to people I know personally. And I like to say this too, even students, I've been there. Kim probably, they've been there. But for some reason, we've been conditioned to believe that grades are an extension of our identity. Similar to what we may drive or what we may label as social power by social circles. It has absolutely nothing to do with identity. I tell students, you can get an A, but it doesn't mean you master the concept of what you study. So, potential assignments. This is what I will be pushing to my students in marketing, to my students in campaigning. Research. And first of all, examine the psychological factors that make someone vulnerable to recruitment. Let's take a look at what does research say about it, right? And seeking belonging in a leader. Some folks are looking to be led in order to be a part of something, right? I remember the first time I met T.D. Jakes, that pastor down in Texas. I was teaching at a school when he came. And that's the first time I found out that these churches are ensuring you have to submit your W-2 form. What? Absolutely. Yes. Look it up. I wouldn't tell you. So here's my point. And people flock to these folks. You have to submit your W-2 forms. And I found out when you see, I'm not sure it goes to Joe Osteen and all those folks. The folks who are the closest are the high titles. The money is the closer you get to the entity. And the further back you get, it's just common folks. So do research on what's allowing it psychologically, what's happening. Have students to analyze the rhetoric to a specific quote. Find a quote. Let's zero in on a quote of your choice and analyze the language and the persuasive techniques that's used by its leader, right? How do they attract? And more importantly, how do they retain people? How do they keep people in these spaces, right? There's a documentary I used to screen in my course, my writing for social equity course, called False Confessions. And students learn from false confessions that detectives in America are given a green light by Congress to lie about evidence. And there's this technique. So I ask students, in your same line, could you see yourself ever confessing to something you've never done, confessing to a word? It was like, no, Jones, couldn't do it. I would never do it. And when we go through the piece, they learn about this technique called the REIT technique, REIT. The REIT technique is something that was conceived by the military, but it's something that detectives use, where they tell the story, and they keep pushing the story on you, and keep pushing it on you, and they close the space in. And when you rhetorically regurgitate the story back, you put yourself in the sword, and they use that as evidence against you. The REIT technique. Okay. Have students to analyze the rhetoric of a quote, discuss the use of us versus them. I think Adam O'Kelly, you may have mentioned that, but discuss the use of us versus them, the language, outdated cliches. Jim Jones used a whole bunch of cliches, right? And I keep saying him because he's the one that pops in my mind. And any other notable strategies, right? Let's discuss this language after we research it. Compare and contrast real quotes to fictional portrayal quotes. So one thing I would have students do is to think of a film, or maybe even screen a film about quotes that's fictional, and then have students to compare and contrast the actors, actresses, right? Their language and their psyche to a real quote. Communication podcasts. The other thing is have students to create their own podcasts. That's something I've been doing the last maybe 3 years with my annotated bibliography. No more title being they have to create podcasts and articulate rhetorically their sources. But I thought that would be a good idea with this. Have students to create a podcast where they're discussing all of these things and the power of language based upon their experiences with language. Yeah, those are my slides, and I'll pass it back to Amanda. Right.
I'm also stealing from you. Don't hurt his burdens.
I just realized how to minimize that. I didn't want to interrupt my colleagues. So our last presenter has a video. Okay. I'm going to play the video, but when I look through this video, it's not a very long video. It's 3 minutes. But when I was viewing the video, I'm a slow reader, and I found that I had to pause it. So I'm going to do that a little bit. So this is Christina Damian's video, and she teaches primarily ELTA, so non-native speakers, but she's teaching a writing one this semester, and she's got ideas for how to use this text as well. So you just step up to that with. She would ask students to compare what Montell says in her book to the world they see around them. Find evidence of or find examples of the kinds of cultish language like the love bombing, the other linguistic techniques. Find them in the real world and document them. Using corpus linguistics, analyze social media posts, etc. This is interesting. Look for gaslighting on social media, which is easy to find. Comparing speaking in tongues across different cultures. Found this really interesting. Have students think about online algorithms as invisible cult leaders, as manipulative. Last slide. Second bit. Students debate instructor-prompted chatbot using the same rhetorical wins from Cultish to break down conspiracy theories. She's added some stuff. This one? Yeah. So I haven't used a lot of bots, but you can prompt them to take on a persona. You could prompt the chat to take on the persona of a cult leader and to respond to you as a cult leader. Yeah.
So one box one.
Right.
And they're also
Yeah. You may not have to program it. I mean, many of them are already programmed. Yeah. And to want to please you, which is maybe the prime reason that they're no good for writing. Yeah.
Okay. It's our presentation. We have time for questions or observations. Yeah.
Library, a library guide, and they're putting together for this.